Welcome, fright fanatics, to this, the Horror Story Corner, where tonight we have a fiendish fable penned by no other than the legendary Robert Bloch. It concerns a man plagued by that most filthy and singularly annoying of insects, born from the wriggling devourer of rot, the fly. However, this is no ordinary insect, and it is one that may lead our protagonist to us here in the Horror Story Corner. I hope you enjoy Beelzebub.
Howard was still half asleep when he heard the buzzing. It was a faint, persistent drone, balanced delicately on the very threshold of consciousness. For a moment, Howard wasn't sure whether the sound came from the sleeping side or the waking side of his mind. God knows he'd heard plenty of strange noises in his sleep lately. Made them, too. Anita was always complaining about how he'd wake up in the middle of the night, screaming at the top of his lungs. But he had reasons to be upset. The way things were going, and besides, Anita was always complaining, period. The drone deepened, insistently, and Howard knew he was awake now. He could feel the stale heat of the bedroom and the response his body was making to it. The loginess of his limbs, and the cold pattern of perspiration forming on them. Bzzz. Howard opened his eyes. The room was dim, but the California sunshine filtering through the smog was also filtering through the interstices of the window blinds, just enough to transform the bungalow court apartment into a small oven with its baking heat. Just enough to give Howard a glimpse of what he didn't want to see. The living room filled with a fan-shaped clutter of clothing and furniture radiating from the axis of the roll-away bed. The cubbyhole kitchen through the open archway, with the caked and crusted dishes heaped in the sink. Yes, and the damned portable typewriter on the table in the corner, its carriage accusingly empty, and its untouched keys leering up like rows of dusty teeth. Rows of dusty teeth. Christ, man, what a writer you are when you're asleep, that is. But he wasn't asleep. He could hear that buzzing, louder now, much louder. Goddamn fly. How did it get in here, with all the windows tight shut? Anita had a thing about opening windows, no matter how hot it was, when she had her curlers in. And she always had the curlers. Bzzz. Howard sat up. The noise was too loud to be coming from the kitchen. It had to be here in the room. He turned and glanced at the huddle in the bed beside him. The sun glinted off the curlers. A ray played cruelly across Anita's neck, accentuating the stringy fold. That's where the fly was sitting. At first, he thought it was Anita's mole, but moles don't move, moles don't buzz. It was a fly, all right. He stared at Anita, thinking, God, how he hated the thing. Noisy, rasping at your nerves, always around when you don't want it, demanding attention, intruding on your privacy, dirty, messy creature carrying filth. Somehow his hand had drawn back, and now it was coming forward. He wanted to hit it. Not too hard. Just swat it and destroy it, because it had to be destroyed. He had to get rid of it. Howard wasn't conscious of the blow or its force. Realization of its impact vanished before the overwhelming explosion of Anita's shrill scream. "Oh, you bastard!" And then she was sitting up, striking at him, not once, but again and again, harder and harder, and shrieking louder and louder. You, trying to kill me while I'm asleep!" It was crazy. She was crazy, and he was trying to explain about the fly. He was only going to swat the fly, but she wouldn't listen. She never listened. When she got into one of those hysterical rages, She was crying, sobbing, stumbling into the bathroom. Of course, she locked the door. There was no sense continuing with the same old scene, no sense pounding on the panel and stammering out apologies. All he could do was find his clothes and get dressed, locate his briefcase under the jumble of her clothing. Past 9 already, and his appointment was at 10. He had to be there on time. In his haste, Howard forgot all about the fly. What he had to decide now was whether to spend the next 20 minutes catching a cup of coffee at the drugstore on the corner, or run into the barber shop for a quick shave. He settled for the shave. It was more important to show up looking presentable. Luck was with him. He got the car started without any trouble, made it over to the barber shop. There was a vacant chair. Howard settled back in it, grateful for the hot towels that blotted out the sound of the radio and the sight of the autographed photos on the wall. Why was it that every damned barbershop in this town had to keep the radio blatting at full volume, had to disfigure the wall with faded pictures of faded actors? And why was it that barbers didn't have enough sense to keep their places clean? Howard found himself flinging the sheet aside before the barber had finished applying aftershave lotion. "What's the matter with you guys? Can't you even keep the lousy flies out of here?" He hadn't meant to blow up, and come to think of it, there was only one fly, buzzing around the ceiling in Howard's range of vision as he lay tilted back in the chair. But Howard didn't come to think of it until he was out of the shop, until the damage was done, the way that crummy barber had looked at him. Oh well, he wouldn't be going back there again anyway. There were plenty of other barbers around. Not so many producers, though. At least not so many who wanted to make a deal with him. Howard reminded himself of that as he wheeled up to the studio gate. He put a big smile on his face for the guard who directed him to parking space, and an even bigger smile for Miss Rogers, the secretary in the outer office of Trebor Productions. But he saved the biggest smile for Joe Trebor. That took a little doing. First of all, there was the damned half-hour wait in the outer office. Well, that was Trebor for you. An A-OK ratfink. Of course, they were all alike, these producers. They all had the same routine. Set up an appointment, then postpone it. Set up another, give you the pressure. How soon can you make it? Tomorrow morning? Good, 10 o'clock sharp in my office. I'll leave a pass at the gate for you. So you showed up, promptly at 10, carrying the briefcase and taking the best possible care of that extra big smile so that it wouldn't crack around the edges. And then you sat there like a damn fool in the reception room, crossing and uncrossing your legs in the uncomfortable little chair, trying not to stare at the secretary as she kept putting calls through to the guy you were supposed to be seeing right now. Sometimes you even sat there while the charm boys finger-snapped their way in and out of the sanctum sanctorium. The sharp young agent's hair just a little too long over the back of the button-down collar, trousers just a little too tight in the seat, always a little bit ahead of you as they made their pitch, set their deal for somebody else. Howard got into Joe Trebor's office at 10:32. He stayed 6 minutes. 3 minutes later, he was standing before a payphone in a glass booth, trying to dial Dr. Blanchard's number with a forefinger that wouldn't stop trembling. Then, interrupting the incoherency he poured into the mouthpiece, to take a wild swipe at the insect that soared and swooped insanely within the confines of the phone booth. "It's following me!" he shouted into the mouthpiece. "The damn thing's following me!" "Do you want to talk about it now?" asked Dr. Blanchard, quietly. As Howard sank back into the big leather-covered chair, scarcely another 20 minutes had elapsed, but Howard was not quite calm, and of course he wanted to talk about it. That's why he'd called Blanchard, even though it wasn't his regular appointment day. That's why he'd come running over here to the nice, quiet office where you could sit back and relax and nobody pressured you. It wasn't like Joe Trebor's office. He was telling the doctor about that now. About the phony modern paintings on the wall and the big desk with the high executive chair behind it and the low chair in front of it, the one you sat in. When you sat in that chair, the producer looked down on you, and you had to look up to him. You looked up over that bare desk which told you here was a man too important to waste his time on mere paperwork the way writers did. You looked at the intercom and the phone with the 6 extension buttons which showed just how busy a producer was, and at the solid silver water carafe which showed just how wealthy he was. And you looked at the picture of the wife and kids which was supposed to show you what a solid citizen he was, if you didn't happen to know the stories about the way he interviewed for feminine leads. But you didn't look directly at Joe Trebor because he was staring at you, staring and waiting for you to come up with the storyline. You got the notes out of the briefcase and you started to read, all the while conscious that you were just wasting your time with a showboat operator like this, a guy who kept interrupting to make Mickey Mouse suggestions for changes, a guy who didn't understand the values you were aiming for. All he knew was storyline and how do you go out? What's the curtain? You need a tag here, and why don't you change it and play the scene exterior? Typical fly-by-night producer. And then the buzzing, just when you were trying to build, trying to sell, trying to nail him down, the buzzing, drowning out your voice. Then you looked up and saw the fly perched on the stopper of the silver carafe. It was just squatting there, rubbing its tiny forelegs together, cleansing them. If you put those forelegs under a microscope, you'd understand the need for cleansing because they were covered with filth. Then you looked at Joe Trebor, who was smiling and shaking his head and saying, "Sorry, I don't quite see it. You haven't licked the storyline yet." And as he said it, he rubbed his hands together because they were covered with filth. He'd walked through filth. He'd left a trail of filth wherever he went. And what right had he to buzz at you? And what right did he have to keep flies in his office to bug you when you were telling your story? Your story that you'd sweated over for weeks in that lousy one-room apartment like a furnace, with Anita slopping around in her dirty horse coat and whining, "Why didn't you get up the bread?" And some of this you thought, and some of it you must have said, because Joe Trebor stood up, and he got that look on his face, and he was telling you something you couldn't quite hear because of the damned buzzing. So you smiled, holding your lips very tight, not wanting to admit you blew it, but you knew. And you split out and made the phone call to the doctor, and there it was, the fly, the same fly, the little black thing with a million eyes that can see everything, everywhere, right in the booth with you now, buzzing and listening. It saw and it heard and it followed you through all the filth in the world. Howard knew Dr. Blanchard understood because he was nodding quietly, calm and relaxed, and there was nothing wrong with his eyes. They weren't like Anita's or the barber's or Joe Trebor's eyes, all accusing him of putting them on. And they weren't like the fly's eyes had been either, watching and waiting. Dr. Blanchard really understood. Now he was asking Howard all about it. When the fly had first appeared. How long ago he could remember being conscious of flies. He even knew that talking about such things made Howard a little nervous because he was saying, "Don't be afraid. There are no flies here. Just go right ahead and say whatever comes to mind. You won't be interrupted by any buzzing. The buzzing. It was in the room. Howard heard it. He couldn't hear the doctor's voice anymore because the buzzing was so loud. He couldn't even hear his own voice shouting, but he knew he was telling the doctor, "You're wrong! It's here! It followed me! Can't you see?" But of course Dr. Blanchard couldn't see. How could he see when the fly, the black buzzing fly, was sitting there and buzzing on top of his bald head? And it buzzed and it stared and the droning drilled through Howard's skull, and the eyes lanced his brain, and he had to run, had to get out of there, had to get away, because they didn't believe him. Nobody believed him, not even the doctor could help him now. Howard didn't stop running until he got to the car. He was panting when he climbed in, panting and wringing wet with perspiration. He could feel his heart pounding, but he forced himself to be calm. He had to be calm, very calm now, because he knew there was no one else to depend on. He'd have to do it all himself. The first thing was to check the car very thoroughly, including the back seat, and then, when he was quite sure nothing had gotten in, to lock the doors and roll up the windows. It was hot inside the car, but he could stand the heat. He could stand anything but the buzzing and the stare. He started the engine, pulled out. Calm now. Keep calm. Drive carefully, right up to the freeway access, and edge out slowly. Get into the left lane and open up. Now, drive fast. The faster you drive, the faster you get away from the buzzing and the staring. Keep it at 70. A fly can't do 70, can it? That is, if the fly is real. Howard took a deep breath. Suppose everyone else was right and he was wrong, and there was no fly except in his own imagination. But it couldn't be, not in his imagination. The one tool, the one weapon, the one area a writer must protect. You can't open your imagination up to a buzzing beast, a creature that crawls through filth. You can't allow the invasion of an insect that incubates in your own insanity, an incarnation of your own personal devil, an evil that torments you incessantly. But if it was that way, then of course there was no escape. He couldn't drive fast enough, run far enough to get away, and there was no hope for him at all. Buzz! There it was in the car. At least he heard it, but the sound might be coming from inside his own shattering skull. And now he saw it fluttering against the windshield before him, just below the rear-view mirror. Or did he see it? Wasn't it just a fragment of inward vision? How could it be? How could there be a real fly here in the car with all the windows closed tight? But he saw and he heard, and it buzzed and it crawled, and his sweat poured and his heart thumped and his breath rasped, and he knew it was real. It had to be real. And if it was, then this was his chance, his only chance, locked inside the car with it where it couldn't get away. Howard shifted his foot from the gas pedal to the brake. The car was hurtling down an incline, but he knew he had it in control. Everything was under control now. All he needed to do was swat the fly. The creature had paused in its progress across the windshield, so that it was poised directly before his line of vision. Howard could see it very clearly now. As his hand moved up, he almost laughed at himself as he stared, laughed at his absurd fantasies. Silly to think of demoniac possession by such a tiny, fragile insect. He could see every delicate veining and tracery of its fluttering wings as he leaned forward. For an instant he even stared into its eyes, its multifaceted eyes, mirrors of myriad mysteries. In that instant he knew, but his hand was already swooping out, and all he could do was shriek as the car lurched and the culvert wall loomed. When the squad car came, the fly was resting very quietly on Howard's eyeball. Its eyes swiveled slowly as the red-necked patrolman bent over the body, pausing just long enough to sense the frustration, the suppressed anger, the seething tension behind the stolid face. Then it rose gracefully and buzzed around the patrolman's shoulders as he straightened. As the patrolman turned away, the fly followed. The patrolman sighed. "Poor devil," he muttered. It was, of course, an epitaph.
Poor Howard. It seems like something was really bugging him. No matter, he's at peace now. and the fly has its new victim in its sight. And as for me, I'm off to a party in the corner. I hear it's got a real buzz to it. Thanks for listening, and as ever, sleep well.